Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you all here today. So we've been discussing the Lotus Sutra, a writing of uncertain origin, probably composed in northern India around 100 CE or thereabouts, that has profoundly affected East Asian Buddhism and hence Buddhism in the West. And last week we talked about a chapter in which the Buddha was answering questions from Maitreya. And Maitreya would be well known to people who are familiar with Buddhist literature to be the future Buddha. And we find out in that chapter that at one point in Maitreya's past lives, he had been basically the worst student in the room. The chapter this week, entitled Skillful Means or Expedient Means, is the Buddha responding to questions from Shariputra. And Shariputra was known as the disciple of the Buddha, who was gifted in conceptual thinking, extremely knowledgeable, gifted with words, concepts, rules, an ardent practitioner of the precepts, avidly upright. So the choice of these individuals to which the Buddha is speaking is not arbitrary. So what does the Buddha have to say to Shariputra? Well, first of all, the chapter starts at what I'll do to give the writing in this sutra is important. The way things are expressed, reducing it to a concept is probably not the best way to appreciate the Lotus Sutra. So I'm going to be reading several selections from the chapter to give you a taste of the language. And then I'll make a few comments at the end of the talk. But at the beginning of the chapter, the Buddha starts speaking. At that time, the world-honored one rose calmly from concentration and said to Shariputra, "The wisdom of Buddhas is both profound and immeasurable, and the gateways to this wisdom are hard to understand, hard to enter. No Shravaka, disciple, or Pratyeka Buddha, solitary practitioner, can apprehend it. Why is this? It is because every Buddha has been closely associated with hundreds of thousands of billions of Buddhas in the past, fully practicing the way of the immeasurable Dharma of all the Buddhas. Boldly and diligently working, they have become famous everywhere, fulfilling the very profound, unprecedented Dharma and teaching it wherever opportunities arose. Yet their intention is difficult to grasp. Their intention is difficult to grasp. Shariputra, ever since I became a Buddha, I have used a variety of causal explanations and a variety of parables to teach and preach, and countless skillful means to lead living beings, enabling them to give up their attachments, enabling them to give up their attachments. Why? Because the Tathagata has attained full use of skillful means and practice of insight. So after this telling, the Buddha pauses and says, "But this is enough, Shariputra. No more needs to be said." Why? Because what the Buddha has achieved is most rare and difficult to understand. Only among Buddhas can the true character of all things be fathomed. This is because every existing thing has such characteristics. Every existing thing has such characteristics, such a nature, such an embodiment, such powers, such actions, such causes, such conditions, such effects, such rewards and retributions, and yet such a complete fundamental coherence. And even if bodhisattvas who have taken up the way, who have given offerings to countless Buddhas, have fully understand the meaning of the various teachings and been able to teach the Dharma well, who were as plentiful as rice, hemp, bamboo, or reeds, and filled all the worlds of the 10 directions, even if these bodhisattvas, with complete attention and wonderful wisdom, were all to think together, for many eons, as the Ganges has grains of sand, they could not gain Buddha wisdom. So Shariputra is a little confused at this point. He refers to the audience. He says, at that time in the great assembly, there were Shravakas, Arhats without faults, 1,200 in all, and there were various monks and nuns, laymen and lay women, who had vowed to become disciples or solitary Buddhas. They all thought, why does the world honored one speak so enthusiastically about skillful means? Why does he say that the Buddhist Dharma is so profound and so difficult to comprehend? Then Shariputra, seeing the doubts in the minds of the 4 groups, the monks and the nuns and the lay men and lay women, and not fully understood everything himself, spoke to the Buddha. World-honored one, what are the reasons for you to praise so enthusiastically the Buddha's principle of skillful means and the very profound, fine, and wonderful Dharma, which is so hard to understand? Never before have I heard such teachings from the Buddha. Now these 4 groups are full of doubt. Will the world-honored one please explain why you have so enthusiastically praised this very profound, fine, and wonderful Dharma, which is so difficult to comprehend? So if this is sort of unreachable, why are you talking about it to us and causing us this confusion? Then the Buddha says to Shariputra, stop. There is no need to say more. If I explain this matter, all of the world's heavenly beings, as well as human beings, will be startled and perplexed. All the human beings will be startled and perplexed. So Shariputra doesn't stop there. He essentially restates the query 2 more times. So he's asked this question 3 times. The Buddha responds. Then the world-honored one said to Shariputra, well, since you have now earnestly repeated your request 3 times, how can I refuse you? Now listen carefully. Ponder over what I will say and remember it, for I will explain it to you clearly. When he had said this, immediately some 5,000 monks and nuns, laymen and laywomen got up, bowing to the Buddha, and left the room. This is a famous passage in the Lotus Sutra. So 5,000 of his listeners got up and left before he said what he had to say. Why? Because their roots of utter arrogance, because of their roots of utter arrogance, they imagine themselves to have already attained and borne witness to what they had not actually attained. Having such faults, they could not stay. The world-honored one kept silent and did not stop them. The Buddha goes on to explain, Shariputra, if such monks and nuns say to themselves, I have already become an arhat, I am already awakened, this is my last body, I have attained nirvana. And if they no longer vow to seek supreme awakening, you should know that they are extremely arrogant. Why? Because it is impossible that a monk who has already become an arhat would not sit and listen, would not believe this Dharma. If all living beings, having encountered Buddhas in the past and having heard the Dharma, have been generous, moral, patient, persistent, practiced meditation and wisdom, and so on, in various ways cultivating merit and virtue, all such people have fulfilled the Buddha way. When Buddhas have passed away, if anyone is good and gentle, all such living beings have fulfilled the Buddha way. This passage referring to the 6 paramitas of the Bodhisattva path: generosity, morality, patience or equanimity, persistence or effort, meditation, and wisdom. And then he goes on to talk about various devotional practices that fulfill the Buddha way: bowing, prostrations, erecting stupas, etc. And ends with, even if little children at play use reeds, sticks, or branches, or even their fingernails to draw images of Buddha, all such people gradually gaining merit and developing their great compassion have fulfilled the Buddha way. So these simple devotional practices, developing their compassion, fulfilling the Buddha way. Or even if they have performed music by beating drums or blowing horns or conch shells or playing pipes, flutes, lutes, harps, mandolins, cymbals, or gongs, producing fine sounds and presenting them as offerings, or if they joyfully praise the Buddha's virtues in song, even with just a tiny sound, they have fulfilled the Buddha way. And at the end of this chapter, it should be understood, Shariputra, that the Dharma of the Buddhas is like this. With trillions of skillful means in accord with what is good, they teach the Dharma. Those who have not practiced and studied it cannot fully understand this. But all of you, knowing that the Buddhas, the teachers of the world, use skillful means according to what is appropriate, should have no more doubt. Your hearts should be filled with joy, for you know that you too will become Buddhas. So Shariputra, who was sort of the analytical mind among the Buddha's followings, is being instructed. He's being instructed that you can't really think yourself into the Buddha's wisdom. So years ago when I was a senior in college and my mind was much sharper than it is today, I took a course in math logic that was devoted, the entire semester was devoted to the proof of Gödel's theorem. Gödel's theorem was published in the early 1930s, and it was in the context of a wave of philosophical thinking that we refer to as logical positivism. And this was among other proponents of logical positivism was Bertrand Russell and Whitehead. And their project was based on a belief that a universal language could be constructed, that a symbolic language could be constructed in which all propositions could be stated. And furthermore, using prescribed rules, prescribed operators or algorithms, one could prove or disprove any proposition. This was a theory of human knowledge that we could, if we thought about things properly, determine the true and false, the truth and falsity of every meaningful proposition. Gödel's theorem, often called the incompleteness theorem, demonstrated that any such language and any set of algorithms that was internally consistent, which would seem to be an important characteristic, any such language that was internally consistent would necessarily be incomplete. In other words, there would be some propositions that could not be verified as to whether they were true or false. It prescribed a stark limit on the project of the logical positivists. And it indicated in a way how, whereas such languages may be useful, they were always, in some manner, incomplete. And the Buddha is saying that the teachings with words and concepts and lists these are useful. They're, as he said, skillful means, but they are incomplete. That the Buddha way is actualized through doing, not through just thinking. And thinking can be helpful. Reading the texts, being aware of the moral guidelines that the Buddha outlines so extensively. Helpful, skillful means, but incomplete. There are some propositions that just cannot be determined as true or false by thinking alone and require the doing through acts of kindness, through devotional practices. And we can discuss this more in the groups. I guess in encountering the Buddha's teachings, one question that has occurred to me recurrently is, does the cultivation of wisdom necessarily lead to compassion? In other words, all of this teaching and learning about impermanence, about interdependence, emptiness, unsatisfactoriness, all of that teaching that pervades Buddhist literature. Does learning about all that necessarily make you a more compassionate person? And I'm not sure I can think myself into that. It may be one of those propositions that can't be verified within the model itself, within the language itself, and is only verifiable through the doing, through the living of our lives, through playing our part in the world. Maybe that link between wisdom and compassion is the unproven proposition. So I think I'll stop there. I know this may have been a little bit heady, but I guess questions would be, The Buddha talks about this one vehicle, talks around the concept, the notion of one vehicle in the Buddha way. What is he really talking about? Because, at least in my reading, it's never really spelled out clearly, to the frustration of Maitreya and to the frustration of Shariputra, in the words of this sutra. And what about these devotional practices? What's the place of those in our lives in 2023 in the West? So we'll break up into small groups and then we'll reconvene in a few moments. Thank you very much for listening today.